Interesting Times by Terry Pratchett, book review. Now, this is the third book now I've read in the Discworld series, after Going Postal and Monstrous Regiment. After having been introduced to this series, I'm now coming back to it frequently. I do plan to kind of vary my reading eventually, broaden out to other things, but I've been enjoying the Discworld series so far, and I came across this book, and I discovered it was a satire of the Communist Revolution in China. And then I really wanted to read it. Communist Revolution in China has always been kind of one of my pet historical interests. I'm a history buff. I kind of like history about kind of social movements or revolutionary movements in general. And I took a class in college called Modern East Asian History, which kind of covered Chinese radicalism in the early half of the 20th century, and I just found it fascinating. I'm not going to be able to do it justice here to kind of talk about everything that got my interest at that time, but to put it in a nutshell maybe, one of the things about Chinese radicalism, which makes it so fascinating, is kind of all these ideas flooded into China at once. So you have kind of Christianity, democracy, communism, socialism, anarchism, kind of all these radical Western ideas flooding into China. Intellectuals in China are kind of jumping around from idea to idea. Sounds like it was a very interesting time. Definitely an interesting time to read about. I don't know if it would have been fun to live through. But things like the May 4th movement in China, you can look this up. This is something we studied in the history class. Fascinating time of intellectual change in China. So, this is a satire on that whole time in Chinese history, kind of told through the setting of the fantasy Discworld. Now, in the Discworld, the Discworld is like its kind of own world, and there's no China because it's a fantasy world, but there's a counterweight continent, which is, the continent on kind of the other half of the Discworld, which is kind of the substitute for Asia. And then the fictional Ajitian people are supposed to represent the Chinese. One of the characters from Pratchett's Discworld is kind of over here on the other half of the world, acting as a point of view character and kind of observing what is going on. Now, it's a funny book, but Pratchett tends to satirize with a hammer instead of with a needle. So, all the intricacies of the early 20th century Chinese radicalism, he doesn't really tease them out so much, but he does write about the culture clash between kind of these Western philosophies of rebellion, communism and anarchism, and the traditional culture of submission to authority. I'll give a quote which kind of illustrates this satire. The Red Army met in secret session. They opened their meeting by singing revolutionary songs, and since disobedience to authority did not come easily to the Ajitian character, these had titles like Stead Progress and Limited Disobedience while retaining well-formulated good manners. So it's a little bit silly there, but it does make you think when these kind of rebellious philosophies first came into China or into Asia. I think there was a bit of a culture clash there. Pratchett, I'm told, has anarchist leanings, at least that's what the cover jacket to this book said. And so he's skeptical about the authority, the assumed authority of the communist revolutionaries. And this comes through in parts of the book. I'll quote a dialogue from this book. So, quoting, this is Rincewind, who's the character who's come from the other side of Discworld. Look, Rincewind said, rubbing his forehead. All those people out in the fields, the water buffalo people. If you have a revolution, it'll all be better for them, will it? Of course, said Butterfly. They will no longer be subject to the cruel and capricious whims of the Forbidden City. Oh, that's good, said Rincewind. So they'll sort of be in charge of themselves, will they? Indeed, said Lotus Blossom. By means of the People's Committee, said Butterfly. Rincewind pressed both hands to his head. My word, he said. I don't know why, but I had this predictive flash. They looked impressed. I had this sudden feeling, he went on, that there won't be all that many water buffalo string holders on the People's Committee. In fact, I get this kind of voice telling me that a lot of the People's Committee, correct me if I'm wrong, are standing in front of me right now. Initially, of course, said Butterfly, the peasants can't even read and write. I expect they don't even know how to farm properly, said Rincewind gloomily. Not after doing it for 3,000 or 4,000 years. End quote. The book is also a satire on all things Asian. The author mixes a lot of Japanese and Chinese cultural stereotypes together. I'm not sure if this is unintentional or if this is just part of the joke. I suspect it's part of the joke. Now, after several years of living in Japan, I'm a lot more attuned to the Japanese elements than the Chinese. I'd be interested in the perspective of somebody who's spent time in China. But the book satirized many things I recognized from Japan, like the no drama, origami, tea ceremonies, kimonos, all of which come from Japan, not China, but are in the book. Many of the jokes are cheap, harmless, throwaway puns, like puns about the no drama. So, quote, we are a traveling theater, she said. It is convenient. No actors are allowed to move around. Aren't they? Said Rincewind. You do not understand. We are no actors. Oh, you weren't too bad. End quote. Other parts of the book cut a little deeper into satires of the Asian character. I'm not sure if this is a type of thing people should be offended by or not. This gets into a discussion about the nature of satire and the difference between satirizing an ethnic group and satirizing a nation composed of that ethnic group, and the difference between satirizing stereotypes and perpetuating stereotypes. I'm going to stay clear of all that for now. I'll just say I enjoyed the book and I didn't find anything horribly offensive, but I don't know. Let me know what you thought, if you thought this crossed the line at places.